The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Theresa Zimmerman stood motionless before the freshly dug earth. The sounds of the gravedigger's shovel still echoing in her mind long after he'd departed. The simple wooden marker bore her husband's name, Benjamin Zimmerman, gone too soon at 27, leaving her a widow at just 23 in the unforgiving Colorado territory of 1876. Autumn winds whispered through the cemetery's cottonwood trees, carrying away her quiet sobs. 3 days had passed since the mining accident that claimed Benjamin and 5 other men, buried under tons of rock when the new silver mine shaft collapsed outside Silver Cliff. 3 days since the life she'd carefully built over 2 years of marriage had crumbled as suddenly as that unstable tunnel. "Madam," a deep voice called softly from behind, "they're closing the gates soon." Theresa didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the stranger. Her fingers clutched the simple gold band on her left hand, twisting it in endless circles. "Madam," the voice came again, closer this time. "I don't mean to intrude, but there's a storm coming. You shouldn't be out here when it hits." Finally, she turned. Through tear-blurred vision, she made out the silhouette of a tall man, broad-shouldered against the darkening sky. The brim of his worn cowboy hat shadowed his face, but she could see the concern in his eyes. "I'm not ready," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't leave him here alone." The stranger stepped closer, and she noticed the badge pinned to his vest, a deputy marshal's star. "He won't be alone, madam. The dead have each other for company. It's the living that suffer in solitude." A sob escaped her throat, and Theresa covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Her legs suddenly felt unable to support her weight, and she swayed. In an instant, the deputy was at her side, a steady hand at her elbow. "Let me help you back to town," he offered. "The rain's going to break any minute." As if summoned by his words, thunder rolled in the distance, and the first heavy drops began to fall, quickly turning the cemetery's dirt path to mud. "I don't even know where I'm going," she confessed. "We rented rooms above the Mercantile, without Ben's wages." Her voice trailed off, the impossible future stretching before her. "I'm Deputy Kyle Zankowski," he said, offering his arm for support. "And I promise you won't face this alone, Mrs. Zimmerman, Theresa Zimmerman." She hesitated before accepting his arm, feeling disloyal even in this small gesture. "Mrs. Zimmerman, let me see you safely somewhere tonight. Tomorrow will be time enough to figure out what comes next." The rain fell harder now, soaking through her black mourning dress. With one final glance at Benjamin's grave, Theresa allowed the deputy to guide her toward the cemetery gates, his steady presence the only thing keeping her upright as the storm broke over them both. The downpour intensified as they hurried through Silver Cliff's muddy streets. Deputy Zankowski removed his long coat and draped it over her shoulders despite her weak protests. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, water streamed from the brim of his hat, but he seemed unconcerned with his own discomfort. The office was mercifully warm, a pot-bellied stove glowing in the corner. An older man with a silver-streaked beard looked up from his desk, eyebrows rising at their drenched appearance. "Sheriff Davis," Kyle nodded. "This is Mrs. Zimmerman. Her husband was lost in the mine collapse." The sheriff's face softened with immediate understanding. "Mrs. Zimmerman, please accept my condolences. That was a terrible tragedy." Theresa nodded mechanically, too exhausted for further tears. She stood dripping on the wooden floorboards, feeling utterly displaced, like a piece of driftwood washed up somewhere it didn't belong. "She needs a place to stay," Kyle continued, his voice low. "Their rooms were above Whitaker's store, but I can't afford to keep them," Theresa finished, finding her voice. "I won't take charity, but perhaps someone needs house help or laundry done." The thought of scrubbing other people's linens after her dreams of helping Ben build something of their own made her throat tighten again, but she lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of hard work." Sheriff Davis and Kyle exchanged a glance that she couldn't interpret. "Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house might have a room," the sheriff said slowly, Her rates are fair, and she sometimes takes help in exchange for board. I'll take her there, Kyle offered quickly, then hesitated. But perhaps she should dry off a bit first. The rain doesn't look to be letting up soon. Sheriff Davis nodded and moved to pour a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. Here, Mrs. Zimmerman, this will warm you. The coffee was strong and bitter, but the heat spreading through her hands as she clutched the tin cup was a blessed relief. Kyle pulled a chair near the stove for her, before stepping away to confer quietly with the sheriff in the corner. Theresa knew they were discussing her, probably debating how to handle the latest widow in a town where death came too frequently in the mines, in gunfights, from disease, or the harsh winters. She'd seen it happen to other women since arriving in Silvercliff. Never imagined she'd be one of them so soon. My brother and I have a small ranch about 3 miles outside town, Kyle said, returning to stand before her. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, is getting on in years. She's mentioned needing help with the household duties. Theresa looked up sharply. I don't need your pity, Deputy. It's not pity, madam, it's a fair exchange, room, board, and wages for honest work. His blue eyes held her steadily. You'd have your own quarters in the house, it's respectable employment. I don't know the first thing about ranch work. Can you cook, clean? Mend clothing. When she nodded, he continued. That's all Mrs. Winters does now. The ranch hands take care of the livestock and land. Suspicion flickered through her grief. Why would you offer this to a stranger? Kyle removed his hat, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. My mother was widowed young with 2 sons to raise. A family took her in, gave her work when others would have sent her to a poor house. He twisted the hat in his hands. I believe in returning kindnesses where I can. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. I've known Kyle since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. The Zankowski ranch is a respectable place. You'd be safe there. Theresa stared into her empty coffee cup. The thought of living among strangers terrified her, but no more than the prospect of destitution. Benjamin had been everything: husband, protector, friend. Without him, the world seemed populated by potential threats. I would need to collect my things, she said finally, her decision less a choice than a surrender to necessity. We can do that tomorrow, Kyle replied. Tonight, we'll see you settled at Mrs. Patterson's, and I'll come for you in the morning. One day at a time, Mrs. Zimmerman. One day at a time, she echoed, the phrase both a promise and a question. How many such days would it take before the ache in her chest subsided? She feared she might never know. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time they reached Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building with lace curtains and a wrap-around porch. The landlady, a stout woman with shrewd eyes, looked Theresa up and down before accepting Kyle's explanation and payment for a night's lodging. The room's small but clean, Mrs. Patterson told her, leading the way upstairs. Breakfast is at 6, don't be late or you'll go hungry till noon. Theresa nodded, too tired to respond. The room, when the door opened, was indeed small, just space for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a hook on the wall for clothing. But the linens looked fresh, and after the day's events, she craved only solitude. I'll come by at 9 tomorrow, Kyle said from the doorway, respectfully not entering the room. We'll collect your belongings then. Thank you, Deputy, she managed, not meeting his eyes. After he departed, Theresa removed her sodden dress and hung it to dry. In her chemise, she sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her loss. Benjamin was gone. The future they'd planned, the children they'd hoped for, the small farm they'd dreamed of buying once he'd saved enough from the mine, all buried with him beneath the mountain. She was alone in a harsh land, dependent on the kindness of a stranger. Curling into a ball beneath the thin blanket, Theresa surrendered to exhausted sleep, her wedding ring pressed against her heart. Morning came with cruel brightness, sunshine streaming through the uncurtained window. For one merciful moment upon waking, Theresa forgot her circumstances. Then reality crashed back, heavier than the mine timbers that had failed to hold. She dressed mechanically in her still damp black dress and made her way downstairs. The boarding house dining room held 4 tables, 2 occupied by traveling salesmen who barely glanced up as she entered. Mrs. Patterson wordlessly pointed her toward a chair and brought a plate of eggs and toast with a cup of weak coffee. Theresa forced herself to eat, knowing she needed strength for the day ahead. The food tasted like ash in her mouth, but she methodically cleaned her plate, her mother's voice echoing in her memory about never wasting food. The clock on the wall showed 5 minutes to 9 when a knock came at the front door. Mrs. Patterson answered it, and a moment later, Kyle Zankowski appeared in the dining room doorway, hat in hand. Unlike yesterday, he wore no badge, dressed instead in sturdy ranch clothes denims, a blue cotton shirt, and a leather vest. His dark hair was damp, as if freshly combed. "Good morning, Mrs. Zimmerman," he greeted her. "I've brought the wagon. Are you ready?" Theresa nodded and rose, smoothing her skirts. "I have no luggage here." "Then we'll collect your things from your former lodgings first." The morning air was crisp and clean after the rain, the streets still muddy but passable. Kyle helped her onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. The horses, a well-matched pair of bays, moved forward at his gentle command. "Did you sleep well?" he asked as they traveled, clearly attempting polite conversation. "As well as could be expected," she replied, her gaze fixed on the passing buildings. They were approaching the general store, and her heart beat faster at the thought of entering the rooms she'd shared with Benjamin. "I appreciate your assistance, Deputy, but you needn't feel obligated to continue." "Perhaps I should seek work here in town." Kyle gave her a sidelong glance. "It's not obligation, Mrs. Zimmerman, and please call me Kyle. I'm only deputy part-time when Sheriff Davis needs an extra hand." Before she could respond, they arrived at the mercantile. Kyle jumped down and came around to help her descend, but she was already climbing down independently, unwilling to appear more helpless than she felt. Mr. Whitaker, the store owner, looked up from arranging canned goods when they entered. His expression shifted from business-like to pitying the moment he recognized Theresa. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, coming forward, "I'm mighty sorry about your husband. Ben was a good man." "Thank you," she said quietly, the familiar ache intensifying at hearing Benjamin spoken of in the past tense. "I've come to collect my things." Mr. Whitaker nodded. "Of course, take all the time you need. I haven't touched nothing up there." The stairs to the rented rooms were at the back of the store. Each step felt like climbing a mountain as Theresa ascended, Kyle following at her respectful distance. At the top landing, she paused with her hand on the doorknob, suddenly unable to move forward. "Would you prefer to go in alone?" Kyle asked softly. Theresa shook her head. "No, I just need a moment." When she finally pushed the door open, the familiar scent of home, of Benjamin's soap, of the lavender she kept in their dresser drawers, of the wood polish she used on their few pieces of furniture, nearly brought her to her knees. 2 rooms, a small sitting area with a cook stove and table, and a bedroom visible through the doorway. Their life together, contained in such modest space. Benjamin's coat still hung on the hook by the door, his mining boots below it. A book lay open on the table where he'd left it 3 mornings ago, before heading to the mine for the last time. He'd kissed her goodbye, promised to bring home sugar for the apple pie she planned to bake. Theresa moved to the coat, her fingers touching the rough wool. Without warning, a sob tore from her throat, and then another. She pressed her face into the fabric, breathing in what remained of him. Behind her, Kyle stood silent witness to her grief. He didn't offer hollow comfort or ask her to hurry. He simply waited, solid as the mountains surrounding Silvercliff. When her tears subsided, Theresa straightened her shoulders and turned. "There isn't much to pack. We traveled light from Missouri." "Take whatever means something to you," Kyle said. "The wagon has plenty of room." Over the next hour, Theresa carefully packed her and Benjamin's belongings. Clothing into a trunk, the family Bible with their marriage date recorded inside, the blue china teapot that had been her mother's wedding gift, the quilt her grandmother had made. Benjamin's pocket watch, and the small wooden box containing his letters to her during their courtship. Kyle carried the heavier items down to the wagon without complaint, efficiently loading everything while she settled accounts with Mr. Whittaker. The storekeeper returned the balance of their rent and awkwardly patted her hand. "You ever need anything, Mrs. Zimmerman, you just let me know." The sun was high overhead when they finally headed out of town. Theresa sat rigid beside Kyle, her back straight despite the exhaustion weighing on her. The wagon turned onto a well-maintained road that followed a creek lined with cottonwoods. "It's not far now," Kyle told her, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "The ranch isn't large compared to some, but it's good land. My brother Thomas and I built it up from almost nothing over the last 8 years." "Your brother," Theresa said, "is he married?" She saw a flash of something pain cross Kyle's face before he shook his head. "No, it's just Thomas and me, along with Mrs. Winters and our ranch hands Pablo, Joe, and Ellie. And your parents, both gone now. Pa first in '62, he was with the Union Army at Antietam. Ma lasted until 70, consumption." "I'm sorry," Theresa said, meaning it despite her own grief. Kyle nodded. "Life takes more than it gives sometimes." But not always. They rounded a bend, and the Zankowski ranch came into view. A well-built 2-story house of timber and stone stood proud against the backdrop of mountains. A large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings completed the picture. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a small garden plot was visible near the house. "It's lovely," Theresa said, surprised at the property's neat, prosperous appearance. "Thomas deserves most of the credit," Kyle replied, guiding the wagon toward the house. "He has a head for the business side. I just handle the physical work." A middle-aged woman emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her round face suggested a kind nature. "Mrs. Winters," Kyle called as he brought the wagon to a stop. "This is Mrs. Zimmerman, whom I told you about." The housekeeper approached, studying Theresa with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Welcome to Zankowski Ranch, Mrs. Zimmerman. I've prepared the room in the east wing for you." "Thank you," Theresa replied, suddenly uncertain of her position. Was she staff or guest? The distinction mattered. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Winters added, "We'll talk about your duties tomorrow. Today is for settling in. You've had enough to bear without adding work to it." Kyle helped Theresa down from the wagon, then began unloading her belongings. "I'll have your trunk taken to your room. Would you like to rest, or would you prefer to see the house first?" "The house, please," she said, needing activity to keep the grief at bay. "I'd like to know my surroundings." Mrs. Winters led the tour while Kyle carried Theresa's trunk inside. The Zankowski home was surprisingly spacious and well-furnished, with a large kitchen, dining room, parlor, and study on the ground floor. Upstairs were several bedrooms, including the east room that would be hers, a comfortable chamber with its own small sitting area. "This was originally meant to be the ladies' quarters," Mrs. Winters explained. "But as neither brother married, it's been unused except for occasional guests." Theresa ran her hand over the coverlet on the 4-poster bed. "It's far too fine for a housekeeper." "Nonsense," Mrs. Winters huffed. "The Zankowski boys weren't raised to put on airs. Besides, you're as much companion as help. These men need civilizing influence." Before Theresa could respond to this puzzling statement, boots sounded on the stairs, and a moment later, Kyle appeared in the doorway with another man, clearly his brother, though taller and leaner, with the same dark hair but green eyes instead of blue. "Mrs. Zimmerman, this is my brother, Thomas Zankowski." "Thomas, Mrs. Theresa Zimmerman." Thomas stepped forward, his manner courteous but reserved. "Mrs. Zimmerman, Kyle told me of your circumstances. Please know you're welcome here for as long as you wish to stay." "Thank you, Mr. Zankowski. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work. I won't disappoint you." "I'm sure you won't." His gaze flickered briefly to his brother before returning to her. "If you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to. We'll speak more at supper." After Thomas departed, Mrs. Winters showed Theresa where to find linens and explained the household routine. Breakfast at 6:30, dinner at noon, supper at 6. The men take lunch in the fields when they're working distant pastures. I handle the cooking, but an extra pair of hands is always welcome. The laundry's done Mondays, baking on Tuesdays. The rest we fit in as needed. It sounds manageable, Theresa said, mentally comparing it to her previous duties. More than manageable with two of us, Mrs. Winters replied. Now I'll leave you to unpack and rest. Supper's in 2 hours. Alone in her new room, Theresa carefully put away her few belongings. She placed Benjamin's pocket watch on the bedside table and ran her finger over its engraved surface. I'm trying, she whispered to his memory. I'm trying to survive this. She changed from her morning dress into a simple gray dress, not technically morning attire, but subdued enough to reflect her state of mind. After washing her face and rebraiding her honey-brown hair, she felt marginally more prepared to face her new life, however temporary it might be. When she descended for supper, she found the Zankowski brothers in the dining room, both freshly washed and dressed in clean shirts. Kyle immediately stood when she entered, followed a beat later by Thomas. Mrs. Zimmerman, Kyle said, please join us. The dining table could seat 8 comfortably, but places were set for just the 4 of them. Theresa hesitated, uncertain where to sit until Kyle pulled out the chair to his right. Mrs. Winters brought in a platter of roast beef, followed by bowls of potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread. The meal began quietly, with only the sounds of serving and eating. Theresa forced herself to take small bites, though her appetite remained minimal. She could feel occasional glances from Kyle but kept her eyes on her plate. Mrs. Zimmerman, Thomas finally broke the silence. Kyle tells me you came from Missouri. What brought you to Colorado territory? The promise of a better life, she replied. My husband, Benjamin, heard the mines were hiring at good wages. We'd been tenant farming, but there was never enough left after the landowner took his share. Ben thought we could save enough here to eventually buy our own land. A common dream, Thomas nodded, and not an impossible one despite what happened. Many have built good lives here. Perhaps for some, she said quietly. But the dream died with my husband. Dreams can change, Kyle interjected gently. They can be rebuilt. Theresa looked up then, meeting his gaze directly. Some losses alter you forever, Deputy Zankowski. I'm not the woman I was 3 days ago, and I never will be again. Kyle held her gaze, his blue eyes showing not pity but understanding. No, you won't be. Just as I'm not the boy I was before Antietam, but there's life after loss, Mrs. Zimmerman. Different but still worth living. The intensity of the moment stretched between them until Thomas cleared his throat. Kyle mentioned you might be willing to help with the household accounts, Mrs. Zimmerman. Are you comfortable with figures? Grateful for the change of subject, Theresa nodded. Yes. I kept the books for our farm in Missouri, and I helped Benjamin track our savings here. Excellent. Mrs. Winters is many things, but a bookkeeper isn't one of them. And neither Thomas nor I have the patience for it, Kyle said, a hint of a smile softening his features. Numbers make more sense than people, Theresa replied. They're predictable, reliable. Until they're not, Thomas said cryptically, but we can discuss that another time. For now, you should focus on settling in. After supper, Theresa offered to help Mrs. Winters with the dishes, but the older woman shooed her away. Not tonight. Go get some rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to start work. Instead of returning immediately to her room, Theresa found herself drawn to the front porch. The evening was cool but pleasant, the last rays of sunlight painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple. She sat on a wooden bench, absorbing the quiet beauty of the ranch as twilight descended. Footsteps on the porch boards announced Kyle's presence before he spoke. May I join you? She nodded, and he settled on the far end of the bench, leaving proper distance between them. It's peaceful here, she observed, different from town. That's why I prefer it. Town has too many eyes, too many expectations. Kyle stretched his long legs out before him. Out here a person can just be. Theresa twisted her wedding ring, a habit she'd developed over the past days. I keep expecting to wake up and find this has all been a terrible nightmare, that Ben will be beside me, laughing at my foolish fears. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. After our mother died, I'd catch myself turning to tell her something, forgetting for just an instant that she was gone. Thomas said it happened to him too. The mind protects itself from what the heart can't bear all at once. Does it ever stop, the forgetting and remembering? The frequency lessens. The pain dulls. But no, it doesn't entirely stop, nor should it. The ache is proof they mattered. A coyote called in the distance, its mournful cry echoing off the mountains. Overhead, stars began to appear, brilliant against the darkening sky. I should retire, Theresa said, rising. Thank you for the conversation, Deputy Kyle, he reminded her. Out here, I'm just Kyle, she nodded, acknowledging his request without actually using his given name. Good night, then. Good night, Mrs. Zimmerman. Tomorrow is a new day. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Theresa wondered if she was betraying Benjamin's memory by finding any measure of comfort in another man's presence. But exhaustion soon overtook such thoughts, and she fell into a dreamless sleep. The following days established a routine. Theresa rose early, helping Mrs. Winters prepare breakfast before the ranch hands arrived from the bunkhouse. She learned the household systems, gradually taking on more responsibilities: mending, cleaning, organizing supplies. In the evenings, she began reviewing the ranch ledgers, meticulously checking figures and making suggestions for better record keeping. Kyle was often absent during daylight hours, working the ranch alongside the hired men or occasionally riding into town for his deputy duties. Thomas spent much of his time in the study, managing correspondence and business matters. But suppers brought them all together, and slowly, conversation became less stilted. A week into her stay, Theresa was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw Kyle riding in, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking chestnut mare. Mrs. Zimmerman, he called, dismounting with easy grace. I've brought someone for you to meet. I wasn't aware we were expecting company, she replied, pinning a shirt to the line. Not a person. This is Penny, he patted the mare's neck. I thought you might enjoy riding while you're here. The ranch is too big to explore on foot. Theresa looked at the horse with trepidation. I haven't ridden since I was a girl. Penny's the gentlest horse on the ranch, even Mrs. Winters rides her to town occasionally. Kyle smiled encouragingly. You don't have to decide now. She'll be here when you're ready. The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Theresa off guard. Why are you being so kind to me? Kyle's smile faded, replaced by a serious expression. Because kindness shouldn't be unusual, Mrs. Zimmerman. Because everyone deserves a helping hand when they're down. He paused. And because I recognize the look in your eyes like you're drowning and can't see the shore. Theresa turned away, unable to bear the understanding in his gaze. I should finish the laundry. Of course, but think about the ride. It might do you good to get away from the house for a while. 2 days later, Theresa found herself perched nervously on Penny's back, Kyle walking beside her as they circled the corral. You're a natural, he encouraged as she began to relax. Your posture's perfect. My father insisted I learn to ride properly before he died, she explained. He said a lady should be able to handle herself on horseback. He was right. Independence is valuable, especially out here. By the third circuit, Theresa felt confident enough to hold the reins properly. I think I remember how this works. Ready to try beyond the corral, she nodded, and Kyle opened the gate, still walking beside her as Penny ambled along a well-worn path toward a meadow dotted with wildflowers. This is beautiful, Theresa breathed, taking in the view of mountains beyond the meadow. It's my favorite spot on the ranch, Kyle admitted. I come here to think. Do you think about the war? The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. If he was offended, he didn't show it. Sometimes, more often, I think about what comes next, the ranch, the future. And what does come next for you? Kyle shrugged. That's the question, isn't it? Thomas handles most of the ranch business. My deputy work is just occasional. Sometimes I wonder if I should move on, find my own place. But this is your home, Theresa said, surprised. It is, but a man needs purpose beyond existing. He looked up at her. What about you? What comes next after? He trailed off after my grief. She gave a sad smile. I don't know. I hadn't planned for a life without Benjamin. We were supposed to grow old together. Life rarely follows our plans, Kyle said softly, but that doesn't mean the unplanned path can't lead somewhere worthwhile. They fell into companionable silence as Penny continued her gentle pace through the meadow. For the first time since Benjamin's death, Theresa felt a momentary lightening of the weight she carried, not gone, but briefly bearable. As autumn deepened toward winter, these afternoon rides became a regular occurrence. Kyle would finish his morning ranch work, and after the midday meal, they would explore different parts of the Zankowski property. Sometimes they talked about books they'd read, memories of childhood, observations about nature. Other times they rode in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. Theresa found herself watching for Kyle's return when he went to town, listening for his voice at meals. The realization that she looked forward to their time together both comforted and troubled her. Benjamin was barely 2 months in his grave. What kind of widow found pleasure in another man's company so soon? One evening in late November, Theresa was working on the accounts in the study when Thomas entered. He seemed surprised to find her there. "Forgive me, Mrs. Zimmerman. I didn't realize you were working." "I'm nearly finished," she said, closing the ledger. "Your ranch is doing quite well, Mr. Zankowski. Thanks in no small part to your organizational skills." He remained standing, awkwardly shifting his weight. "May I speak frankly with you?" "Of course," she replied, though wariness crept into her voice. Thomas sat in the chair opposite the desk. "My brother has always had a protective nature. It's what makes him a good deputy, a good brother, a good man." "I've noticed his kindness," Theresa acknowledged cautiously. "Kindness, yes, but there's more to it where you're concerned." Thomas's green eyes studied her intently. "Kyle is developing feelings for you." Theresa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Zankowski, I assure you, I'm not accusing you of anything improper," he interrupted. "I merely want to understand your intentions. Kyle has been hurt before by caring for someone who didn't return his feelings. I wouldn't see him wounded that way again." "I'm a widow," she said quietly. "My husband has been gone only weeks. I have no intentions toward anyone. Yet you spend hours in my brother's company. You smile when he enters a room. He's been kind to me during the worst time of my life." "Of course I'm grateful." Thomas leaned forward. "Gratitude and growing affection can be difficult to distinguish. I only ask that you be honest with yourself and with Kyle about what you feel. He deserves that much." "As do I," Theresa replied, a flash of anger breaking through her composure. "I've lost everything, Mr. Zankowski, my husband, my home, my future. I'm trying to rebuild some semblance of a life. If your brother's friendship helps me do that, I make no apologies for accepting it." Thomas held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I meant no offense, Mrs. Zimmerman. Kyle's happiness matters to me, that's all. And my healing matters to me," she countered. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I should retire for the evening." That night, Theresa lay awake long after the house grew quiet. Thomas's words echoed in her mind, forcing her to examine feelings she'd been carefully avoiding. Did she care for Kyle beyond gratitude? And if she did, what kind of woman did that make her? Benjamin's pocket watch ticked on her bedside table, a constant reminder of her loss. She reached for it, holding the cool metal against her palm. "What would you want for me, Ben?" she whispered. "To mourn forever, or to live again?" The watch offered no answers, only the steady rhythm of time moving forward whether she was ready or not. The first heavy snow came a week later, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white. Trapped indoors by the weather, Theresa helped Mrs. Winters with holiday preparations. Christmas was approaching, bringing its own special kind of pain, the first without Benjamin, another milestone to endure. Kyle seemed to sense her melancholy. One afternoon he found her in the kitchen, staring out the window at the falling snow. Mrs. Winters mentioned you've been quiet today, he said, joining her at the window. Is there anything I can do? Theresa sighed. Benjamin loved Christmas. He was like a child about it, always the first to suggest decorating, always humming carols. Her voice caught. Last year he carved a little wooden angel for our tree, said it looked like me. Kyle was silent for a moment. We don't have to celebrate if it's too painful. No, she shook her head. That wouldn't be fair to everyone else. Besides, hiding from the day won't make it easier. Then perhaps we can honor his memory somehow, include something that would have made him smile. The suggestion was so thoughtful, so perfectly considerate, that Theresa turned to face Kyle fully. Why do you care so much about my feelings, about helping me through this? Kyle's blue eyes held hers steadily. Because I understand loss, Theresa, because no one should face it alone. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it hung in the air between them. And he continued more quietly, because I've come to care about you, more than I should, perhaps. Theresa's heart hammered in her chest. Kyle, you don't need to say anything, he interrupted gently. I don't expect anything from you, I just wanted to be honest. Thomas thinks I should keep my feelings to myself, but I've never believed in hiding truth. I can't, she whispered. It's too soon. I'm still Benjamin's wife. I know. Kyle took a step back, respecting her space. And I would never ask you to be anything else until you're ready. If that day never comes, I'll still count myself fortunate to have known you. He left her then, boots echoing on the wooden floor as he exited the kitchen. Theresa remained by the window, tears blurring her vision as she watched the endless falling snow, feeling as if she stood at a crossroads without a map. Christmas arrived with clear skies and sparkling snow. The Zankowski home was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, a tall tree standing in the parlor. Following Kyle's suggestion, Theresa had placed Benjamin's carved angel near the top, a small tribute to the husband she'd lost. The day brought unexpected gifts, from Mrs. Winters a warm knitted shawl, from Thomas a leather-bound journal, and from Kyle a small wooden box containing a silver brooch shaped like a penny, a reference to the mare that had become her regular companion. It's beautiful, she told him when they had a moment alone, but you shouldn't have. It reminded me of you, he said simply. Strong but graceful, Theresa touched the brooch gently. I have nothing to give in return. Your presence here is gift enough. That evening, after a festive dinner with the ranch hands included, Theresa found herself once more on the porch despite the cold. The sky was brilliant with stars, their light reflecting off the snow-covered landscape. Familiar footsteps approached, and then Kyle was beside her, draping an extra blanket around her shoulders. You'll catch your death out here. I needed a moment of quiet, she explained, to remember Benjamin. Yes, and to think about the future. She turned to face him, gathering her courage. I've been offered a position as a schoolteacher in Denver. The wife of Thomas's business associate mentioned it in her last letter. Kyle's expression remained carefully neutral. When would you leave? After the new year. The school term begins in January. Is that what you want, to leave? Theresa looked out at the starlit ranch. I don't know what I want anymore. This place has become a kind of sanctuary. You and Thomas and Mrs. Winters have been so kind, but it isn't yours, Kyle finished for her. And you need something that is. Yes, she whispered. Exactly that. Then you should go, find your own way. His voice was steady despite the shadow that crossed his features. But know that you'll always have a place here should you want it. In that moment, looking at his face gilded by starlight, Theresa felt a surge of feeling that she wouldn't name. Instead, she said, "Thank you for understanding." Kyle nodded and turned to go. At the door, he paused. Theresa, whatever path you choose, I hope it brings you peace. The 2 weeks before her departure passed too quickly. Theresa packed her belongings, said goodbye to Penny with an apple and many pats, and tried not to notice how Kyle seemed to be making himself scarce, working longer hours away from the house. The evening before she was to leave, Thomas sought her out in the study where she was finalizing the accounts. Everything's in perfect order, he said, reviewing her work. The Denver school is fortunate to have you. Thank you, she replied, closing the ledger for the last time. I've left notes on the system I developed. It should be easy to maintain. Thomas set the book aside. May I speak candidly again? You've never hesitated before. Theresa smiled faintly. My brother is in love with you. The bluntness of the statement took her breath away. Thomas, he won't say it. He thinks it's too soon, that you need time, and perhaps he's right. Thomas leaned against the desk. But he's also the best man I know, and he's never looked at anyone the way he looks at you. I can't stay because of that, Theresa said quietly. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm asking you to be certain leaving is what you truly want. When she didn't answer, Thomas straightened and headed for the door. Safe travels, Mrs. Zimmerman. You'll be missed here. That night, Theresa couldn't sleep. She paced her room, Benjamin's watch clutched in her hand. What should I do? She asked the empty air. How can I know what's right? Dawn found her exhausted but resolved. She dressed carefully in her best traveling dress, navy blue rather than black, the first step away from formal mourning. Downstairs, Mrs. Winters had prepared a special breakfast, and Thomas waited to drive her to the stagecoach station. Is Kyle? Theresa began, looking toward the door. He rode out early, Thomas replied, not meeting her eyes. Said to tell you goodbye and good luck. Disappointment struck her with physical force. She'd expected at least a proper farewell, a chance to thank him one last time. The meal was subdued, Mrs. Winters dabbing at her eyes occasionally. When it was time to leave, the housekeeper embraced her warmly. You take care in that big city, Mrs. Winters instructed, and write to us old folks now and then. I will, Theresa promised, her own eyes damp. Thomas loaded her trunk onto the wagon, and they set off down the snow-covered lane. Theresa looked back at the house that had sheltered her through the worst of her grief, committing it to memory. They were halfway to town when she spotted a lone rider on the ridge above the road. Even at a distance, she recognized Kyle's straight-backed posture, the set of his shoulders. He sat motionless, watching their progress. Stop the wagon, she said suddenly. Thomas glanced at her in surprise. We'll miss the stage. Please, Thomas, just for a moment. He pulled the horses to a halt, and Theresa stood in the wagon bed, raising her hand in farewell. For a long moment, Kyle remained still. Then he raised his hand in answer before turning his horse and disappearing over the ridge. He couldn't bear a proper goodbye, Thomas said softly, not when he wanted to ask you to stay. Theresa sank back onto the seat, her mind in turmoil. Drive on. Please? The stagecoach station was busy when they arrived, travelers coming and going despite the winter weather. Thomas unloaded her trunk and paid for her ticket, then stood awkwardly before her. Thank you for everything, Theresa said, extending her hand. Thomas ignored it and gave her a quick brotherly hug instead. Take care of yourself, Theresa, and remember what I said. The stagecoach arrived in a cloud of steam and pounding hooves. As the driver called for passengers, Theresa took a step toward the vehicle, then stopped. In her mind, she saw Benjamin's face, laughing, kind, the man she'd loved since she was 18. Then Kyle's face appeared alongside, steady, patient, the man who'd helped her find strength when she thought she had none left. I can't go, she whispered, the realization washing over her like a wave. What was that? Thomas asked, already lifting her trunk toward the stagecoach. Theresa turned to him, certainty replacing confusion. I can't go to Denver, it's not where I belong. A slow smile spread across Thomas's face. Where do you belong then? I think you know, she replied. If the offer still stands, it does, it always will, he signaled to the stagecoach driver. We won't be needing that ticket after all. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever. Theresa sat tense on the wagon seat, suddenly fearful. What if Kyle had already left for town? What if he'd changed his mind about his feelings? What if she was making a terrible mistake? He'll be there, Thomas said, as if reading her thoughts. Probably pacing a hole in the barn floor, knowing him. When the ranch house came into view, Theresa saw no sign of life outside. Her heart sank until Thomas pointed toward the stables. He's there. I can see Ranger hasn't been unsaddled yet. Thomas barely brought the wagon to a stop before Theresa was climbing down, her skirts gathered in one hand as she hurried toward the stable. Inside, the warm animal scent greeted her, along with the sound of quiet movement. Kyle stood with his back to the door, brushing down his horse with methodical strokes. His shoulders were slumped, his movements mechanical. "Kyle," she called softly. He froze, brush mid-stroke, then slowly turned. Disbelief, hope, and confusion chased across his features. "Theresa, the stage, I couldn't get on it," she said, taking a step forward. "I couldn't leave." "Why?" His voice was rough, as if he feared the answer. Theresa took another step, then another, until she stood before him. "Because my heart is here now, with you." Kyle's blue eyes searched hers, looking for certainty. "What about Benjamin? I will always love him," she said honestly. "He was my first love, my husband, a good man who deserved a long life." Her voice broke slightly, "but he would want me to be happy. To live fully, and I can't do that without you." "Are you sure?" Kyle whispered, still not reaching for her. "I don't want you to have regrets. The only regret I would have is walking away from what we might build together." She took his hand, feeling its warmth and strength. "I'm not the same woman who came here 3 months ago. I'm stronger now, ready to look forward instead of back." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Kyle raised his free hand to cup her cheek. "I've loved you since I saw you standing at that grave, so broken but still standing." "I never thought," Theresa pressed her fingers to his lips. "I know, neither did I, but here we are." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home, different from Benjamin's kisses, not better or worse, just belonging to another chapter of her life. A chapter she was finally ready to begin. Spring came early to Colorado that year, bringing wildflowers to the meadow and new calves to the Zankowski herd. Theresa stood on the porch, watching as Kyle worked with one of the horses in the corral, his movements confident and graceful. They'd taken things slowly through the winter months, quiet conversations by the fire, rides across the snow-covered pastures, gradual acknowledgement of deepening feelings. Kyle had been patient, never pushing, always attentive to her emotional state. In February, she'd finally removed her wedding ring, placing it carefully in the box with Benjamin's letters and watch. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but no longer a barrier between her past and future. In March, Kyle had formally courted her, bringing wildflowers from the greenhouse in town, taking her to church socials and dinner at the hotel restaurant. Thomas had watched their courtship with approving eyes, while Mrs. Winters had barely contained her joy. And now, on this April morning, Theresa wore a new ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl that had belonged to Kyle's mother. They'd married the previous day in a quiet ceremony at the town church, with Thomas as best man and Mrs. Winters sniffling happily in the front pew. Kyle looked up from his work and spotted her on the porch. His face broke into the smile that never failed to warm her heart, and he waved before turning back to the horse. Theresa touched the pearl on her finger, thinking of the journey that had brought her here. From standing broken at Benjamin's grave to standing tall as Kyle Zankowski's wife, a path she could never have imagined on that rainy autumn day. "You look happy," Thomas said, joining her on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her and leaned against the railing. "I am," she confirmed, accepting the coffee. "More than I thought possible again. Kyle deserves happiness, so do you." Theresa sipped her coffee, watching as her husband finished with the horse and started toward the house. "Thomas, thank you for speaking candidly that day. For making me question what I truly wanted." He shrugged, but his eyes showed pleasure at her words. "Family looks out for each other, and you're family now." Kyle bounded up the porch steps, his face flushed from exertion and the morning chill. "Good morning, wife," he greeted her, pressing a quick kiss to her lips. "Good morning, husband," she replied, the words still new but increasingly natural. Thomas made a show of looking away. "If you two are going to be like this all the time, I might need to build myself a separate house." "You'd miss us too much," Kyle laughed, taking Theresa's hand. "Besides, who would keep the accounts in order?" As the brothers fell into good-natured bickering, Theresa leaned against the porch railing, contentment washing over her. The mountains stood silhouetted against the morning sky, eternal and unchanging, while life flowed around them like water, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, always moving forward. She thought of the cemetery in Silvercliff, of the simple marker bearing Benjamin's name. She would visit again, bring flowers, honor the love they'd shared. But she would no longer stand there broken, drowning in grief. Instead, she would stand as Theresa Zimmerman, a woman who had lost much but found herself again, who had learned that the heart's capacity for love wasn't limited, that joy could follow sorrow like spring follows winter. Kyle's arms slipped around her waist, anchoring her to the present. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Theresa leaned into his embrace. "About how life can surprise you, how endings can become beginnings if you're brave enough to take the first step." "Any regrets?" he asked, a trace of old insecurity in his voice. She turned in his arms, meeting his gaze directly. "Not one. This is where I belong." And as Kyle's lips met hers, Theresa knew it was true. She had traveled through darkness to find this light, through grief to discover new joy. The journey had shaped her, strengthened her, prepared her for this love that was different but no less precious than what came before. On the Zankowski ranch, with mountains as witness and family surrounding her, Theresa had found not just shelter but home, not just survival but life, not just companionship but love. And in the years to come, as their family grew and their bond deepened, she would look back on that rainy day at Benjamin's grave not as an ending, but as the first step toward an unexpected, beautiful beginning.